When the European Economic Community was established in 1957, its aim was, in broad terms, to move towards closer political and economic cooperation. Today, the much bigger, larger, European Union has a far-reaching influence, on many aspects of our lives, from the conditions we work under, to the safety standards we must adhere to, and the environment in which we live. In order to achieve the free flow of goods and services, workers, and capital between the member countries, they needed to establish mutual policies, in areas as diverse as agriculture, transport, and working conditions. When they had agreed on these policies, they became legal law. Now, though, the EU is concerned with a far wider range of issues. Stem cells are the body's master cells, the rare raw material from which we are built. Unlike normal body cells, they can reproduce an indefinite number of times and, when manipulated in the right way, can turn themselves into any type of cell in the body. The most versatile stem cells are those found in the embryo at just a few days old. This ball of a few dozen stem cells eventually goes on to form everything that makes up a human person. In 1998, James Thomson announced that he had isolated human embryonic stem cells in the laboratory. At last, these powerful cells were within the grasp of scientists to experiment with, understand, and develop into fixes for the things that go wrong.
In the 19th century, few people could afford to travel abroad, it was expensive and there weren't the mass transport systems that we have today. So curiosity about foreign lands had to be satisfied through books and drawings. With the advent of photography, a whole new dimension, of reality became available. Publishers were not slow to realize that here was a large new market of people hungry, for travel photography, and they soon had photographers out shooting the best-known European cities, as well as more exotic places further away. People bought the pictures by the millions, and magic lantern shows were presented in schools and lecture halls. Most popular of all, however, was the stereoscopic picture, which presented three-dimensional views and was considered a marvel of Victorian technology.
Have you got kids? You know anyone who does? They're a lot of work, right? Many people would tell you, including me, it's a full-time job. Either you look after them, or you pay someone else to. It's around the clock now. If you live in Australia, you have kids and you don't have an income, or you're on minimum wage, give or take a few $100s a week, you're entitled to some money from Centrelink. It's called the parenting payment, and if you get it, you might have to /sale up to something called Parents Next. Maybe you've heard of it.
So it was a real waiting game and I was just very confused. I did think that I would have a right to the written reasons within the appeal period. It's already difficult enough for asylum seekers and refugees, but when you don't actually know why you've been rejected and people keep telling you that, well, there were oral reasons given on the day, this particular person speaks barely passable English. So there's absolutely no way that he was able to instruct me in any professional sense at all. Meanwhile, Joe's 21-day deadline came and went and still no written judgment. Introduction to the History of Psychology begins with a course Why Study the History of Psychology, and I'd like to discuss several factors that are important to this. Because of course, as a formal discipline psychology came about in about 1879. And we tend to say with the founding of Wilhelm Wundt's laboratory in Leipzig. However, we need to also understand that the concerns of psychology are around well before this date, and therefore it helps to look at what historians have to say about how we go back in time and look at our past. So then when one begins to say, why study the history of psychology? You can really hone in on 4 principles.
And the interesting thing, of course, you run into a semiotics issue very quickly. The epistemologies we're looking at are similar, so of course you say pervasive species, and you come up with they don't know exactly what that means, and you go into a whole process of looking at it, and what's fascinating is the individual communities took that framework and attached it to their cosmology.
You see, Pentecostalism is increasingly popular in Australia. Churches like Hillsong offer an enthusiastic style of worship and the promise of tangible blessings from God, health and wealth in particular. While the number of Australian attending Catholic and Anglican churches is dwindling, Pentecostalism is bucking the trend. The number of followers actually grew almost 20% in the decade to 2016. We've all seen it in the movies. After doing long hard years in prison, a man finally walks free. He steps outside, the sun on his face, the wind in his hair, ready to start over. A new beginning, a new life. The reality of getting out of prison can be very different. If you don't have anyone to pick you up, you might get a transport voucher. If you don't have anywhere to go, you might be given $275, 2 nights in a motel and 1 set of clothes. That's it. There are more people in prison in Australia than ever before. Right now, that's around 40,000 people. If you take the official figures, that's 40% more than 6 years ago. Over half of patients had what we called a no symptoms, no asthma health belief. They thought about and managed their asthma as an acute episodic illness, the way someone would treat a cold or the flu. They felt when they had the wheezing or shortness of breath, that's when they had their asthma, and it made perfect sense for them to use the quick relief medicines and their chronic control of medicines then. But once they started feeling better, they felt there was no reason for using those medicines because they felt okay. In recent years, governments have resorted to selling off aging inner-city housing to raise money. This year, 79 apartments in the brutalist Sirius building, with views of the Sydney Opera House and Harbour Bridge, sold for $150 million. Nearby, in the waterfront suburb of Millers Point, almost 200 properties were sold for $600 million. In Victoria, it's been projects like Northcote and North Melbourne. Just up the road from Pierre in Redfern Waterloo, the infamous Housing Commission block known as the Suicide Towers is marked for demolition. The residents of those 2,000 apartments will be relocated to make way for more than 6,800 new units.